So this is interesting here. This is from the Maple. And they said a business lobby wants austerity to help pay for the military spending. This is in Canada here. The Maple's a Canadian publication. And it says it's not a feasible plan. It's not a reasonable plan. So Canada's leading business lobby group is recommending a deep government spending cuts to help pay for a massive boost in Canadians' military budget. In a recent report published last week, and entitled "Security and Prosperity: The Economic Case for a Defense Industrial Base Strategy," the Business Council of Canada called on the federal government to invest in a strong and sovereign defense industrial base and to increase military spending toward 3% of Canada's GDP after 2034 and 2035. The 3% GDP target exceeds the 2% minimum requirement by the members of NATO, the 32-member military alliance that Canada has been a member since 1949. The 2% target was first set in 2006, and today Canada is among 8 NATO members that spend below that threshold. The BCC wants Canada to hit the 2% target by 2030, 2 years ahead of the Trudeau government's currently promised schedule. But by doing so strategically, it can also supercharge Canada's broader economic security and prosperity, the report argues. The report also warns that Canada's military rivals are investing heavily in their armed forces and refers to a new, more tenuous geopolitical reality fueled by conflicts such as the war in Ukraine. As previously noted by the Maple, BCC's members include executives from defense aircraft manufacturers, Bombardier, CAE Canada, which develops training services for the Canadian Forces. I guess they also train Azov Battalion. And BlackRock, a multi-international investment company with hundreds of millions of dollars invested in arms companies that have Canadian operations such as L3 Harris and RTX, formerly Raytheon. So, anytime you hear people within Parliament talking about military spending, how we need to increase it, and people get this wrong sense to think that that means they're going to spend it towards the veterans, they're going to spend it towards healthcare for veterans, that would be something that I would like to see when it comes to military expense. That is not the case. That is never the case. Anytime they say it's military, we need to extend our military budget, it goes towards the contractors. It goes towards the manufacturers. It goes directly in the pockets of the people that make big business off of death and disparity. It's not actually reinforcing our soldiers. It's not helping our people that have already served and are struggling to get by. So just note that. The Trudeau government has drastically increased military spending since it took office, but pledges to hit the NATO 2% target by 2032, and has also called into question due to the government's allegedly inaccurate economic forecasts. The 2024 federal budget stated that Canada's total defense budget had increased from $18.5 billion in 2015 to a forecasted $33.8 billion per year in 2024-25. The Trudeau government plans to hit $49.5 billion of defense spending by 2030. As people are lining up 2 million per month at food banks. Just note that. Just note that. We're just giving money right to the hands of these defense contractors. If you can even use defense. I use that term lightly. In July, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the PBO, estimated that by 2030, Canada military expenditures fall under NATO's definition that would be higher at $52.2 billion. In October, the PBO said that Canada would need to spend $81.9 billion annually to achieve the Trudeau government's 2% GDP spending goal by 2032, nearly double what the Department of National Defense currently spends. Achieving the BCC's recommendation of hitting the 2% targets 2 years earlier would require $75 billion of annual military spending by 2030. The BCC report said that the amount is $15 billion more that year than currently planned. However, the July PBO report indicates the difference would actually be at least $17 billion. The austerity measures include major spending cuts to social programs. In particular, the budget created a new provincial transfer system that pledged to cut transfers for provincial social programs by $2.5 billion over 2 years, forcing the provinces to make up shortfalls with their own cuts. So, the defense contractors, along with NATO, along with this lobby group, is not only pressuring the federal government to cut its social programs, stab more working class Canadians in the back for their own wishes, but now they want to enforce that onto individual provinces. Individual provinces now have to cough up more money. And how are they going to cough up more money? Well, we're just going to have to cut back on, healthcare. That's already dwindling. Education. That's really a joke. Transportation. That's falling and crumbling. Cut back on the things that actually help Canadians and invest into Canada to send them more off to foreign wars so we can waste more money. Ironically, the 1995 budget also included sharp cuts in military spending with a pledge to slash the defense ministry's budget by $1.6 billion between 1994 and 1995 and 97-98. Veterans Affairs also got cut by $232 million over 3 years. Those cuts were accompanied by promises to terminate 45,000 public service jobs, widespread privatization of government operations, and cuts to business subsidies. David McDonald, a senior economist with the Canadian Centre for Policy's Alternatives, noted that the additional $15 billion that the BCC claimed is needed to meet NATO's target by 2030 would be a major expenditure. The BCC's report noted that aiming for 3% GDP of military expenditure would align Canada with key allies like the United States who have committed to a similar benchmark. But humiliating the Americans, Small said, would drastically alter both Canada's domestic policy and its role in the world, given that the U.S. is one of the world's largest military superpowers. And we're supposed to be peacekeepers. We're supposed to be peacekeepers. We didn't go into Vietnam. We didn't go into the Iraq invasion in the early 2000s. We're trying to cut back on wars. That's the whole motive of being Canadian. That was one of the things that I support. But now here we are, just folding into the whims of the military mafia, the military industrial complex of NATO and this lobby group that funds and partners with all these defense firms that profit off of the death and disparity of others. And none of it's going towards veterans. None of it's going towards soldiers. They're not increasing, veterans hospitals or assistance at legions. They're not doing any of that. Do you know that Trudeau's government's planned spending for D&D is already nearing 15 times more than its planned spending for environment and climate change's core responsibilities and internal services? If we're looking at real and concrete threats to safety and security of people in this country, beyond even talking about the price of groceries or the lack of housing, I think we have to be looking at the climate crisis. So, yeah. Let's not spend it on wasting foreign wars. Let's waste it on the carbon tax that has proven to be ineffective to help the planet. Again, nothing's actually helping these people. Nothing's actually helping ordinary Canadians in this. It's just taking more money for the flourishes of foreign affairs, for the flourishes of the green carbon scam. All of it's just dwindling money out of the pockets of Canadians. It's not actually investing into the people. She added that defense industry lobbyists are constantly pressuring government officials to shape Canada policy in ways that necessitate the procurement of costly military equipment, such as the F-35 fighter jet. Canada is in the fortunate position of possessing significant amounts of many of the world's most critical minerals. The report notes the government of Canada will need to reform project approval and permitting processes, including to allow for streamlined approvals where a project is deemed essential to Canada and its allies' national security interests. Last year, a report published by the US based Center for Strategic and International Studies stated that the mining and processing of minerals are crucial in maintaining the US's military technological edge. BCC members include executives of major Canadian mining companies such as Cameco, Stantec, Rio Tinto, and Teck, all of which have interest in critical mineral extraction and processing. At least one of these companies has struck a major deal amid the new tumultuous geopolitical reality referenced in the BCC report. Cameco signed a 12-year deal last year to supply the Ukrainian government with uranium to power all of its nuclear reactors, which ran on Russian fuel prior to Russia's 2022 invasion. So here's now where we get to Canada's interest in supporting Ukraine. Because it's not just about people, folks. We don't even care about our own people, let alone people in Ukraine. It's not about people. You'll see why. Currently, Ukraine controls 9 of its nuclear reactors. If Ukraine were to break the current military stalemate with Russia and recapture the 6 reactors in its territory that is held by Russian military, Cameco would be given the opportunity to supply those reactors too. In a Cameco press release announcing the deal in February 2023, the Saskatchewan-based company acknowledged several material risks that could affect the contract, including the fact that the continuation or outcome of the conflict between the Ukraine and Russia may prevent Cameco from satisfying the terms of its supply agreement or realizing the expected benefits to Cameco, or have other adverse consequences to Cameco. According to a report by Reuters last year, the war in Ukraine helped ease a more than decade-long slump in the uranium sector. The federal government has viewed the war in Ukraine as an important opportunity for Canadian businesses. In briefing documents obtained by the Maple through an access to information request, former International Development Minister Hajit Shajan was instructed to offer Cameco's CEO Tim Gitzel congratulations for securing the uranium deal during a Ukraine recovery conference held last year. Other briefing notes for the event include a top-line message stating that the destruction of Ukraine and its rebuilding efforts represent an unprecedented commercial opportunity for Canada business in the infrastructure, energy, and resource sectors, among others. So the briefing notes also name-check BlackRock, which the documents note acted as an advisor to Ukraine ministers of economy, and are also putting forward ideas aimed at mobilizing capital in Ukraine's reconstruction. More recently, the Trudeau government has shown little interest in pushing for peace talks with Russia and is in deadlock war with Ukraine, with the Canadian Prime Minister declaring that he opposes Ukraine conceding an inch of territory to Russia in order to end this war. Since Russia began its invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Canada has committed more than $19.5 billion in aid to Ukraine, including $4.5 billion in military assistance. Which, again, Russia did not invade Ukraine. It was defending the Donbass region that are primarily Russian-speaking, Russian-cultured individuals that were being bombarded by Ukraine, by the Azov Battalion that our Canadian Army trained with. What they don't tell you there. Despite determined calls from Canada and its leaders for the war in Ukraine to continue, an increasing number of Ukrainians appear to see things differently. A recent poll published by Gallup found that 52% of Ukrainians would like to see their country negotiate an end to the war as soon as possible. Support for continuing the war has dropped as low as 27% in regions where fighting is the most intense. A majority, 52% of Ukrainians who favor a rapidly negotiated end to the conflict also agree that Ukraine should be open to making some territorial concessions as part of the peace deal to end the war. Look at that. Look at that. So, Canadians are not really in favor of this. And the ones that are pretty much glued to the TV screens of whatever the CBC is parroting about it. Canadians don't want this war to happen. They don't want to be subjugated to nuclear warfare and arsenal. Ukrainians don't want this war. Russia does not want this war. So, who really is running this? Who really is functioning and running this and determining not to negotiate? It's the business interest. It's NATO. It's the military-industrial complex. It's Raytheon. It's BlackRock. It's Vanguard. It's State Street. It's all these corporations that build up these war terrors so that they can profit off a war terror, just like they've been doing for the last how many decades. And they just use Ukraine as cannon fodder, as Adam Schiff said in Congress, the I think California senator, as he once said in Congress, the whole purpose of it is to have Ukrainians fight Russia over there so we don't have to fight them over here. And now we've intensified this war so much, they have gambled with our lives so much that we are at the verge of nuclear warfare. Tucker Carlson says that we are at a hot war with Russia. And if we don't sit to the table right now and negotiate a terms of agreement that everyone can agree on, which is what Trump is promising, that was part of his campaign speech, why many people endorsed him and support him, and I hope that's the result. I hope that's, some optimism with Trump. But if they don't do that, then there is no turning back. Because they're not even talking, they're not even mentioning the fact that this is going to be a huge risk factor to not only our lives here in this country, but to the globe as a whole. And nuclear warfare, once the big kaboom happens, it's over. So let's try to not get to that point. The doomsday clock is closer to midnight than ever before. Let's try to prevent as much as possible, no matter who you are in this world, before all of us go kaboom and life on Earth is completely annihilated.